The Illusion of the Thinker, inspired by Sam Harris, written and published by Audible Aria. This audiobook explores the subtle yet profound realization that most of our suffering stems not from life itself, but from our identification with thought, from the belief that we are the thinker behind our thinking. Through gentle reflection and clear language, each chapter invites you to examine your moment-to-moment experience, to notice the trance of self that shapes your inner life, and to discover the still, open awareness that's always been present. You won't find spiritual jargon or lofty promises here. Just a simple and powerful message that freedom isn't something to achieve, it's something to notice. And when you do, even briefly, the illusion begins to dissolve. So, take a breath, relax your grip on thought, and begin the journey inward. Not to find yourself, but to see that there was no one to find. Chapter 1. Breaking the Spell of Thought. It's just a fact about us that we're thinking basically every moment of the day. We're having a conversation with ourselves. We're remembering the past, anticipating the future, and subtly failing to make actual contact with the present moment. That's where so much of our suffering arises. You're making a cup of tea, and you're thinking about a meeting that's 5 days away, and you're anxious. Meditation is the remedy for that. Once you practice mindfulness, negative states of mind like fear and anger begin to function like mindfulness alarms. The truth is, breaking the spell doesn't even require the contents of consciousness to change. There's a shift that can happen. A realization that you've been lost in thought, and now you're no longer lost. It's not that the thought needs to stop or be replaced, it's just seen clearly as a thought. And in that moment, there's freedom. The conventional sense of self that people walk around with. That sense of being a subject behind the eyes, thinking thoughts and making decisions, is an illusion. That's not to say you never use the word self again, or that you become confused about your name or your physical body. It's simply that when you look closely at the nature of consciousness, that center, that thinker behind the thoughts, isn't there? Most people feel like they're passengers in their bodies, that they're somewhere behind their face looking out at the world. But when you practice meditation and really observe your experience, what you find is that there's no location of the self. There's only experience, the sense of dualism, the meditator aiming attention at the breath or mantra, eventually collapses, and what's left is just the flow of consciousness without a center. Even experienced meditators can maintain that illusion of duality. I am meditating. I am returning to the breath. But the deepest insight is that there's no I who is meditating. There is only awareness itself noticing its contents. There's no need for a subject behind the process. That's a radical shift, realizing that there was no one doing it all along. This isn't just a philosophical point. It has deep implications for how we suffer and how we wake up from suffering. Identification with thought, that automatic, unnoticed belief that I am thinking this, is the core of psychological suffering. And the way out is not to stop thinking, but to see thinking clearly. You begin to notice how much of your life is spent not living, but rehearsing, regretting, predicting, worrying. And all of that happens in thought. Thought pretends to be reality, but it's only a model, and often a very poor one. The actual present moment is never captured in thought. It can only be experienced, so when people ask what meditation really is, It's not about breathing or sitting still. It's about waking up to this fact. You are not the thinker. There is thinking, but no thinker behind it. Thoughts arise by themselves, and you don't choose them. You can observe them. And in that observation, the illusion of the self begins to dissolve. And what's revealed is something incredibly peaceful. Not ecstatic, not mind-blowing, just open, quiet, free. That's the ground of being that's available to all of us always. The self is like a cloud covering the sky, always moving, always temporary. And meditation lets you see the sky again. Chapter 2. You are dreaming while awake. Ordinary thinking is very much like dreaming. When you're dreaming, you don't know that you're dreaming. You're just living it. You could be in the strangest situation. Flying, arguing with a long-lost friend, running from something undefined. And you accept it completely. That's the nature of thought, too. When we're lost in thought, we're unaware that it's thought. It just becomes reality. You rehearse an argument, catastrophize about something that hasn't happened, relive a regret. And for that time, you are not here. There's no awareness of making tea, or walking across the room, or seeing the sunlight through the window. You're inside your head, in a kind of waking dream. It's not metaphorical. It's very close neurologically to dreaming. You're hallucinating a world internally, a world shaped by fear, desire, memory, prediction. And the tragedy is that you don't know it's happening. You're too distracted to even recognize that you're not here. And it's in those moments that we suffer. Not because of external events, but because of our mind's insistence on living somewhere else. The body is present, but the mind is 5 days in the future, imagining something that may never occur, or worrying about something that cannot be changed. And this rehearsal, this mental simulation, creates real emotional consequences. We feel anxious, angry, impatient, all because we're unaware of our thinking. The similarity to psychosis is not trivial. A person walking down the street muttering to themselves, gesturing at people who aren't there, might be labeled as mentally ill, but we're all doing a version of that. Constantly talking to people in our heads who aren't with us, rerunning past conversations, worrying about future ones. We're just socially conditioned to do it silently, but it's still madness, and we call it normal. The real freedom begins when you start to see that, when you become aware of thought as thought. You catch yourself thinking, and instead of following it, you let it go. That moment of recognition is the doorway. It's small, but it leads to something vast. The recognition that awareness is present and it's untouched by what appears in it. Thoughts come and go, but awareness remains. Meditation isn't about controlling thoughts. It's not about replacing negative thoughts with positive ones or silencing the mind. It's about changing your relationship to thoughts, seeing that you're not the author of them. You don't choose them. They simply appear. And if you don't grasp at them, if you don't believe them, they vanish on their own. There's an old analogy from lucid dreaming. When you become lucid in a dream, nothing has to change. The monsters don't need to disappear. The setting can stay the same, but your relationship to it has changed completely. You know it's a dream, and that knowledge makes you free. It's the same with mindfulness. The world doesn't change, but your mind does. The next time you're gripped by anxiety, remember this. It began with a thought. That thought appeared, and you believed it. You followed it. You rehearsed it. You forgot that it was only a thought. You identified with it, and it became you. But the truth is, it was always just a thought. It had no power beyond your belief in it. The more closely you observe your mind, the more absurd it becomes. You see how many of your thoughts are repetitive, how little control you have over their content, how quickly they shift. And yet, each one comes with the illusion of certainty, as if it were important, as if it demanded your attention. That's the trance we're all in. And the moment you see it for what it is, the spell weakens. What meditation gives you is not a new belief, but a new way of seeing. You begin to notice moments of awareness that are free from thought, gaps between one story and the next. And those gaps are not empty. They're peaceful, they're open, they're full of presence. The mind doesn't need to be filled every second. Awareness itself is enough. It may sound simple, even trivial, but it changes everything. When you learn to recognize thought as thought, feeling as feeling, and return again and again to the simple fact of being aware. That's the path. You're not adding anything. You're seeing clearly. And in that clarity, the self begins to fall away. Not because you lost it, but because it was never really there. Chapter 3. The self is not where you think. Most people move through life assuming they are the thinker of their thoughts, the doer of their actions, the one behind their eyes looking out. This sense of self, a persistent internal narrator, feels so familiar that we rarely question it. But when you really look for that self, it isn't there. There's no hidden operator, no homunculus sitting behind the eyes. There's just consciousness and the contents of consciousness. Thoughts, sensations, emotions, perceptions, all appearing, changing and disappearing. It's easy to say this intellectually, but the real shift happens when you see it directly. And for that, meditation is the most useful tool we have. Not because it creates something new, but because it strips away what isn't real. It shows you that what you took to be the center of experience, the observer, the controller, was only ever another appearance within experience itself. Think about the sense of being behind your face, of looking out from your head at a world that's separate from you. That's how most of us feel by default. But when you pay close attention, you'll see that this perspective is just a mental image. There is no behind. There is no fixed location of awareness. There's just a field of experience, changing moment by moment. Even the idea that you have a body, rather than being the body, reinforces this dualism. People often imagine themselves as ghosts inside machines, consciousness trapped within flesh. But this isn't how we actually experience the body. We feel the breath in the chest, pressure in the feet, warmth on the skin. These are all sensations appearing in consciousness. The body is part of the field, not separate from it. There's no inner self observing it from a distance. In truth, we don't even experience having a brain. You've never seen your brain. You've never felt it directly. And yet you may believe you are your brain, that somewhere inside that grey matter is a center, a witness, a true you. But that's just another concept. As an experience, the self is nowhere to be found. Now, none of this means we lose the ability to function. It doesn't mean you forget your name or can't cross the street. What changes is the relationship to identity. You can still refer to yourself conventionally. You can use I and me in conversation. But inwardly, you no longer feel that there's a permanent self that needs protection, promotion, or defense. And that difference is profound. Most suffering is built around this imagined self. We worry what people think of us. We feel slighted, jealous, ashamed. We replay conversations and regret our behavior. But who, exactly, is at the center of all that turmoil? Look closely, and the one you think is suffering is just another thought, another feeling, another image. Fleeting, insubstantial, ungraspable. We're so used to thinking of ourselves as subjects in a world of objects that we rarely notice how strange that division is. Why should there be a split between what is aware and what is known? Isn't it all part of a single flow of experience? Meditation begins to reveal that unity. You notice that sights, sounds, thoughts, and sensations all appear in the same space. There's no boundary between you and the world. The line you thought existed was imagined. And that imagined boundary isn't just philosophical. It's emotional. It's where fear and craving arise. When you feel separate, you need to defend yourself. You need to secure your future, your reputation, your safety. But when that boundary dissolves, even briefly, those compulsions begin to soften. You see that awareness is already open, already free. It doesn't need to be improved. It just needs to be recognized. People often ask, if there's no self, who is aware? But that question assumes its own answer. It presumes that awareness must belong to someone, like a property tied to an owner. But what if that's the illusion? What if awareness is just awareness, centerless, ownerless, impersonal? What if it doesn't need a self to exist? This isn't something to believe. It's something to see. You can verify it for yourself every time you meditate. Close your eyes. Listen to the sounds. Feel your body. Notice thoughts, coming and going. And now try to find the observer. Look for it. Where is it? Is it behind the eyes? In the chest? In the head? You won't find it. Because it's not a thing. Awareness doesn't stand apart from its contents. It is the space in which they appear. And once you see that clearly, even for a moment, something fundamental shifts. You're no longer trapped in the story of me. You're not bound to the past or anxious about the future. There's just this moment, endlessly renewing itself. And you're no longer inside it. You are it. That's the liberation meditation points to. Chapter 4. Thought is not the enemy. Identification Island. The mind is always active. It generates thoughts automatically, endlessly, without permission. Thoughts about the past, the future, judgments, plans, worries. Most of them repeat. Most are unnoticed. But they shape your entire sense of reality, unless you learn to see them clearly. The problem is not that we think. The problem is that we don't know we're thinking. We're identified with thought, merged with it, lost inside it. And in that loss, we suffer. You're making tea, and suddenly you're anxious. Why? Because a thought arose, a memory, a worry, a prediction. But you didn't notice the thought. You felt the anxiety. Now you're reacting emotionally to a future that hasn't happened. You're already there, defending yourself in an imaginary argument, trying to impress someone who isn't in the room. And none of it is real. It's a thought. It's happening in consciousness, not in the world. What makes this so strange is how completely we take the ride. Thought appears, and we become it. We don't question its validity. We don't see it as thought. We feel it as truth. We act on it. We suffer over it. And then we ask why life feels so difficult. But the difficulty isn't in the moment. It's in the overlay, the inner commentary, the unexamined voice. Meditation offers a different relationship. It's not about stopping thoughts, or judging them, or replacing them with better ones. It's about seeing clearly that thoughts are not self. They are events in consciousness. Like sounds or sensations, they arise and pass. They're not chosen. They don't need to be believed. That shift, from being the thinker to observing thought, is the doorway to freedom. You're not trying to control the mind. You're learning to step outside its illusion. You watch it generate its stories. And you stop taking them personally. Thought still happens, but the spell is broken. There's something deeply liberating about seeing how much of your suffering is constructed. You were never angry at a person. You were angry at a thought about that person. You were never anxious about the future. You were anxious about a mental image of it. Reality rarely hurts as much as your mind says it will. And sometimes it doesn't hurt at all. The pain is in the rehearsal. This is why spiritual practice is not about avoiding the world. It's about seeing it clearly. Most of our emotional life is spent responding not to the present moment, but to the stories we tell ourselves about it. And those stories are fueled by identification. This is happening to me. I am the one who is afraid. I need this to go a certain way. But when you look for the I at the center of those sentences, it's not there. You can feel fear arise, and instead of saying, I am afraid, you can see fear as fear, a sensation, a pulse of energy, a thought. It doesn't need to be resisted or indulged. It just needs to be seen. And in that seeing, it begins to shift. This applies to everything. Sadness, anger, jealousy, pride. These are not who you are. They are appearances in consciousness, like weather systems passing through the sky. And you are not the weather, you are the open space in which it unfolds. Still, this doesn't mean that difficult emotions should be denied or suppressed. You can't pretend not to feel what you feel, but you can question whether you need to build a self around it. Are you sad, or is there sadness? Are you angry, or is anger simply arising? The difference matters. One leads to entanglement. The other leads to release. Over time, meditation teaches you to recognize emotional suffering as a signal, a mindfulness bell. It reminds you to come back, to check in, to notice what's happening without getting pulled in. The more often you do that, the more quickly the spell breaks. There's a kind of dignity in this way of living. You're not fighting with your mind. You're not trying to be someone else. You're simply allowing each moment to be what it is. Clear, open, undistorted by compulsive identification. You're not resisting thought. You're seeing through it. And as this becomes more natural, the flavor of ordinary life begins to change. The space between thoughts feels wider. The grip of emotions loosens. You still think, you still feel, but you no longer take it all so personally. You're not inside the story. You're seeing the story unfold. This doesn't mean life becomes passive or indifferent. Quite the opposite. It becomes more vivid, more responsive. You begin to act from clarity rather than compulsion. You say what needs to be said. You feel what needs to be felt. But it arises from presence, not from narrative. You're not chasing control. You're embodying awareness. And in that space, even the most mundane experiences become more alive. Drinking tea, walking outside, talking to someone you love. These are no longer just things happening to a self. They are simply happening, and you are wide open to them. There's no need for commentary, no need for improvement. There's just this moment, and the freedom to meet it as it is. Chapter 5. Presence without a watcher. When people begin to meditate, they often carry an invisible assumption that there's a self who is doing the meditating, that someone is behind the eyes, concentrating, watching, aiming attention. Even when you're told again and again that awareness has no center, that assumption quietly persists. I am focusing, I am observing, I am trying to be present. But that's still the illusion at work. What's overlooked is that presence doesn't require a watcher. Attention happens on its own. Sounds are heard. Sensations are felt. Thoughts arise and pass. All of this unfolds within consciousness, not in front of it. There's no one behind the experience, orchestrating it. There is just experience. And the more clearly you see that, the more you realize there was never a need for a self at all. This is where even advanced meditation practice can become subtly trapped. You've let go of some identification with thought. You've noticed the breath. You've returned to the moment. But the one doing all that still feels like you. A meditator, a witness, a subject behind the scenes. And that's the final illusion. If you pay very close attention, you'll see that even the sense of observing comes and goes. Sometimes you're deeply focused. Sometimes you're spaced out. Sometimes you're just here. That observing quality, what people often call mindfulness, is itself an appearance in consciousness. It's not the root. It's not you. There's a moment in meditation when the center drops out. You realize that attention is not being aimed, is simply landing. Sounds don't arrive at you, they arise in you. The breath isn't being watched, it's simply known. There's no one inside looking out. There's just this field of awareness, bright and empty and alive. That shift is often subtle. There's no flashing light, no epiphany. It's more like noticing something that's always been true, as if you'd been looking through a glass window for years without realizing it was there. The moment you notice the glass, everything changes. Not because the world changes, but because now you see what you had been overlooking. Once that insight lands, even briefly, it changes the quality of experience. Life no longer feels like something happening to you. It just is. There's no longer a separation between subject and object, self and world. There's only presence, without a person present. This doesn't mean that you disappear in some mystical void. You can still function, speak, remember your name. But inwardly, something softens. The compulsive striving to be someone, to control everything, to be seen in a certain way, that relaxes. It becomes less important, less solid, and in its place is space. It's worth emphasizing. This isn't about belief. It's not a philosophy. It's not a mystical claim. It's a matter of direct experience. Right now, as you read this, you can pause and look for the self. Where are you? Are you in your head? Behind your eyes? In the chest? As a matter of experience, you won't find anything solid. There are thoughts, emotions, sensations, but no you behind them. The idea of you is just another thought. This is the heart of non-dual practice. There's no longer a gap between awareness and what's known. The observer and the observed are one. Experience is not being filtered through an internal narrator. It's being known directly, in real time, without commentary. That's why it feels so peaceful. Not because everything is pleasant, but because the friction of separation is gone. And from that place, action still happens. Speech happens. Decisions are made. But they come from clarity, not from identity. You're not acting to prop up a self-image. You're not reacting to protect a fragile ego. You're simply responding to what is, without effort, without pretense. Sometimes people worry that losing the sense of self will make them passive or disengaged. But in practice, the opposite is often true. When you're no longer preoccupied with me, you become more available to others. You listen more deeply. You act more skillfully. Compassion arises more naturally. Why? Because the barrier of self-concern has dissolved. And this is not something reserved for monks or sages. It's available to anyone in any moment. You don't need special circumstances. You don't need decades of retreat. You just need to see clearly, to recognize that consciousness is already free, and that everything else is a passing show. The journey is paradoxical. You begin thinking there's somewhere to get to, some higher state to attain. But in the end, you realize the destination was always here. You were never outside of awareness. You just didn't notice. And now that you do, the path becomes the goal. Each moment of recognition is the arrival. There's nothing more to add. You don't need to become someone. You don't need to transcend anything. You simply need to look, without flinching, without grasping, and see what's already true. That there's only this happening now. No self, no center, just presence, wide and open and still. Chapter 6. Waking up is remembering what you already know. There's a moment in everyone's life, sometimes brief, sometimes accidental, when the noise quiets. The usual story of who you are fades for just a moment. Maybe it happens while watching a sunset, or in the final seconds before sleep, or during a long walk without a phone or distraction. And for that instant, you're simply here, present, awake, not as someone being present, but as presence itself. Then the moment passes and the mind returns to its usual narration. But something about that moment stays with you. Meditation is not about creating that moment. It's about recognizing it. It's about learning to access what was already there, but unnoticed. That's why waking up isn't about addition. It's about subtraction. You're not adding new experiences, new concepts, new identities. You're removing what obscures the reality that has always been available. Awareness without self. The illusion of self is persistent, not because it's complex, but because it's habitual. We've been practicing it our whole lives. Every time we say I, every time we remember, desire, regret, defend, we reinforce the sense of being someone at the center of experience. But when we examine that habit closely, we find it resting on nothing. There's no one there. Just thinking, feeling, sensing, happening by itself, without a thinker, without a feeler. Waking up, then, is often more like remembering than discovering. You're not uncovering something hidden in a mountain cave. You're realizing that what you were looking for was already in your hand. You just hadn't noticed. You thought freedom was somewhere else. After years of effort, after a better meditation, after enough retreats. But it turns out the door was never locked. You simply hadn't opened it. This is why the most important insight often feels so ordinary. There's no fireworks, no transcendental chorus, just a quiet recognition. Oh, this. This is what's always been here. The thoughts come and go, and I don't need to follow them. Emotions arise, and I don't need to resist them. There's just awareness, and it's already free. The mistake we make is placing awakening in the future. We imagine it as a goal we'll reach one day, once we're sufficiently purified, disciplined, worthy. But that mindset keeps us trapped in the very illusion we're trying to escape. The belief that we are seekers searching for something, that we are not yet there, that we are incomplete. And so long as that belief holds, the moment of recognition remains postponed. What changes everything is realizing that freedom is not something you achieve. It's something you notice. And it's always noticed now. Not later, not after. Now you don't meditate to become free. You meditate to remember that you already are. Even when lost in thought, even when caught in anger or doubt, awareness remains unchanged. It is the open field in which all of it happens. And you are not outside of it. You are it. This doesn't mean there's no value in practice. Far from it. Practice is how you get better at remembering. It's how you shorten the gap between forgetting and waking up. You might spend years lost in identification with thought. Then, with practice, maybe it's just an hour. Then a few minutes. Then you catch it in the moment. And you're back. Back in awareness, back in presence, back in the freedom that was never gone. It's not about getting rid of thoughts or emotions. It's about recognizing their nature. A thought appears, you don't chase it. An emotion surges, you don't build a story around it. You let it be. And in that letting be, something opens. There's clarity, there's space. There's a sense of returning home, even though you never left. It can be tempting to chase after states, bliss, insight, oneness. But all of that is impermanent. What lasts is awareness itself. It doesn't change when the mood changes. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It's like the sky, unchanged by the weather, untouched by the passing clouds. Your thoughts are the clouds. Your awareness is the sky, and that sky is always here. Even now, you can notice it. Before the next thought, in the space between these words, there is just this. Not silence, not stillness, just presence. Awareness that needs no name, no label, no self. It doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't have to be special. It just is. That's why so much of the spiritual path is about simplicity, about returning, about noticing again and again what has always been true. You don't need a different experience. You need a different relationship to experience. One that doesn't cling, doesn't resist, doesn't narrate. One that allows life to arise as it is without inserting a me at the center of it all. And when you live from that place, even briefly, the world feels lighter. Not because everything is perfect, but because the burden of self has been set down. The striving quiets, the defensiveness fades, and in its place is a kind of ease, a spaciousness, a willingness to meet life, not as someone, but as awareness itself, vast, open, and free. Chapter 7. The Half-Life of Suffering. Negative emotions aren't inherently bad. They're part of our evolutionary toolkit. Signals that something matters, that something needs attention. Fear, anger, sadness. They can all be appropriate responses to real events. But the problem lies not in their appearance, but in their persistence. It's how long they last, how deeply we get entangled, how thoroughly we believe the thoughts that accompany them. There's a world of difference between being angry for 10 seconds and being angry for 10 hours. In 10 seconds, anger can help you set a boundary, speak a truth, act decisively. But in 10 hours, it begins to corrode. You rehearse arguments. You escalate judgment. You drag others into the narrative, and you suffer, long after the cause has passed. What meditation reveals is that these states are more optional than they appear. You can't always stop the first surge, the flash of adrenaline, the rise of tension. But you can choose how long you stay there. You can learn to feel the spark without feeding the fire. You can catch the loop before it repeats. You can step off the ride. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion or pretending you're calm. It means observing what's happening. The thought, the sensation, the urge, and refusing to identify with it there. You don't become the anger. You don't narrate it. You don't justify it, you just watch. And very often, that's enough. The energy begins to shift. The thought dissolves. The spell breaks. Think of suffering as having a half-life. With awareness, that half-life shortens. What might have consumed you for days begins to fade in minutes. The pain doesn't vanish. The memory might remain. But the identification weakens. You're no longer inside the emotion acting it out. You're aware of it. And awareness is what creates space. This space is not detached or cold. It's not about indifference. It's about freedom. Freedom to feel without being consumed. Freedom to respond without being reactive. When you're lost in anger, you don't see clearly. You attack the wrong target. You escalate what needs soothing. But from awareness, you can still speak, still act, just without confusion. Over time, this changes your relationship to your own mind. You stop fearing your emotions. You stop being bullied by them. Even intense feelings become workable. You know they'll arise, you know they'll pass. And you trust that awareness is big enough to hold them. There's a kind of quiet confidence in that. Not the confidence of control, but the confidence of clarity. What helps is recognizing the early signals, the tightness in the chest, the rush of heat, the restless thoughts. These are not failures, they're cues. They invite you to look closer, to ask, what story am I telling right now? Do I need to follow it? And often the answer is no. You don't need to keep replaying the insult. You don't need to rehearse the revenge. You can pause. You can let go. And if the story keeps returning, that's fine too. Awareness doesn't demand perfection. You don't have to win every time. You just have to notice. Each moment of recognition is enough. Each return is a small act of freedom. And slowly, that freedom becomes your baseline. People sometimes think meditation means being serene all the time. But that's a misunderstanding. The goal isn't to stop feeling. The goal is to stop being controlled by what you feel. You can still be sad, still be angry, still be moved. But now there's a choice. Now there's space. And that space is what changes everything. It's also important to see that thoughts themselves aren't the problem. They're not your enemy. They're just tools. Often useful, sometimes noisy. What creates suffering is identification. The sense that I am this thought, I must obey it, I must react. But when you see a thought as just another appearance, like a sound or a shadow, its power fades. This is especially important when dealing with self-referential thoughts. The ones that say, I'm not good enough. I always mess this up. Nobody understands me. These thoughts don't just float by. They stick. They define. But only if you let them. If you see them clearly, without flinching, they lose their grip. They become what they always were. Sounds in the mind, passing shapes. The same applies to fear. Fear often masquerades as preparation. You feel anxious, and the mind says it's helping. It's solving the problem, getting you ready. But in most cases, it's not. It's just looping. It's just replaying worst-case scenarios. and the body reacts, tensing, bracing, for something that isn't happening. That's the madness we all live in. And that's the madness we can step out of. Awareness is not a perfect shield. You'll still get hurt. You'll still stumble. But you won't be lost. You won't be confused about what's happening. And that clarity is its own form of healing. It's not dramatic. It's not flashy. It's subtle, quiet, persistent, like light dissolving fog. And in the end, that's what meditation trains you for. Not to avoid life, but to meet it with wisdom, to see clearly, to feel fully, and to know that suffering, while sometimes unavoidable, doesn't have to be prolonged, that you can live in a way where pain arises, passes, and teaches, without becoming a prison. Chapter 8. Impermanence is the beginning of wisdom. Everything you love will change. Everything you fear will pass. Every moment, every sensation, every relationship, all of it is impermanent. And though this sounds bleak to the mind that clings, it is the foundation of freedom. It's only when you see that nothing lasts that you begin to let go. Not out of despair, but out of wisdom. If happiness depends on holding something in place, a feeling, a person, a moment, then happiness becomes fragile. It's always one step away from loss, and loss is inevitable. The body ages, plans fail, people leave. Even the most beautiful experiences fade into memory, and memory itself will dissolve. But impermanence is not just something to be endured, it's something to be understood. Because when you see clearly that everything changes, you stop resisting change. You stop clinging to what must slip through your fingers. And that surrender is not resignation. It's release. It's the end of struggle. Meditation trains this recognition. It shows you the truth directly. You sit and you feel the breath. Here, then gone. A sound, rising, falling. A thought, appearing, disappearing. Nothing holds. Nothing stays. And yet awareness remains. The contents change, but the space in which they arise is always here. The mistake we make is thinking that satisfaction can be found in something temporary. We believe the next success, the next relationship, the next insight will complete us. But it doesn't. Not for long. The joy fades. The novelty wears off. And then we start searching again. It's a cycle driven by desire and forgetting. What we forget is that no state of mind, no matter how sublime, can be permanent. You might experience love, creativity, but you can't hold on to it. And if you try, the grasping itself becomes suffering. You turn joy into anxiety. You ruin the moment by fearing its end. So the deeper insight is not in extending good experiences. It's in realizing that fulfillment isn't tied to any particular experience at all. It's in knowing that awareness itself, prior to content, is already whole, already open, already free. You don't need the moment to be perfect. You just need to stop resisting what is. When you stop resisting, even pain changes. It doesn't become pleasant, but it becomes workable. It becomes something you can meet with compassion rather than fear. The tightness loosens. The panic softens. You realize that even pain is impermanent. Even this will pass. And in that moment, you're no longer a victim of it. You're simply present. This applies not only to physical pain, but to emotional pain, to discomfort, to boredom. All of it is shaped by resistance. The thought, this shouldn't be happening, adds a layer of suffering. But when you accept what is, not as approval, but as recognition, you reclaim your energy. You meet the moment directly. Impermanence also invites gratitude. When you understand that nothing lasts, you begin to cherish what's here. Not desperately, but sincerely. You appreciate the warmth of sunlight, the voice of a loved one, the breath in your chest. Not because they'll always be there, but because they won't. Their impermanence gives them value. And so spiritual life isn't about detachment from the world. It's about intimacy with it. A willingness to feel fully, even when it hurts. A willingness to love without guarantees. A willingness to be here, now, without demanding that now be different. In the Buddhist tradition, impermanence is not seen as tragic. It's seen as liberating. It means that no matter what's happening, joy or sorrow, it cannot imprison you. It will change. And if you can rest in that truth, you're no longer at war with your experience. You can flow with life, not against it. But this isn't a one-time realization. It's something to be seen again and again. Every breath, every step, every interaction is a reminder. Everything you notice, if you look closely enough, is already changing. The body ages, the mind shifts, the weather turns. That's not bad news. That's the nature of reality. That's the invitation to wake up. You can begin simply. Notice a sound as it fades. Notice a sensation as it moves. Notice a thought as it vanishes. Each time, you're training the recognition that nothing is solid. Nothing is fixed. And yet, in the midst of all that change, something essential remains. The knowing. The awareness itself. And this awareness is not indifferent. It's not detached in the cold sense. It's intimate. It allows everything to be just as it is. It resists nothing. It clings to nothing. And because of that, it's at peace. So the path is not about becoming numb. It's about becoming free. Free to feel. Free to change. Free to let life unfold without needing to control it. And in that freedom there's a quiet joy. Not the joy of possession, but the joy of presence. You begin to see that everything you were searching for in permanence was already available in presence. Not because it would last forever, but because it was enough, here, now. And the more you return to that recognition, the less you need life to be different, the more you can simply live. Chapter 9. The space where the self should be. There's a question most people never think to ask. Where is the self located? We assume we're somewhere behind the eyes. Inside the head, looking out. That's the felt sense. A small observer watching the world unfold. But if you look closely, that sense begins to dissolve. You can see sights, hear sounds, feel sensations, think thoughts. But where is the one experiencing them? The idea of a separate self begins to unravel when you examine it directly. There are thoughts, but no thinker. Sensations, but no feeler. Perceptions, but no perceiver. There is only awareness and its contents. And none of it points to a center. There is no place in the mind where you can find you. There's only experience happening on its own. This is what's meant by selflessness. It doesn't mean that nothing exists. It means that the thing you thought existed. A solid, enduring I at the heart of everything. Never did. The self is not something you lose through meditation. It's something you discover was never really there. When this is seen clearly, it changes the way everything feels. Life is no longer happening to someone. There's just life unfolding. Not from a distance, not detached, but intimately, fully. You still function. You still speak, decide, respond. But the burden of being someone lightens. The background noise of self-concern begins to fade. One of the reasons this illusion is so persistent is that it's reinforced by language. Every sentence begins with I want, I feel, I think. We use the word so frequently that we forget to question it. But I is just a placeholder. A convenient fiction. It doesn't point to a thing. It points to a pattern of thoughts, memories, reactions, none of which are permanent and none of which are truly you. Meditation offers a way out. Not by replacing thoughts, but by looking beyond them. When a thought arises, ask, who is thinking it? Don't answer with another thought. Look, feel, wait. What you'll find is just awareness, open, unlocated, silent. Thoughts appear in it. Emotions ripple through it. But it doesn't have edges. It doesn't have a center. It doesn't belong to anyone. This is not just an experience to be had in silence on a cushion. It's something that begins to color ordinary life. The next time you're caught in traffic, or having a difficult conversation, or worrying late at night, pause. Notice the thoughts, notice the tension, and then ask, where is the one this is happening to? You may feel anger, or fear, or embarrassment, but those are appearances. They arise, they peak, they pass. There's no need to wrap a self around them. Let them come and go, as everything does. They don't define you. There is no you to define. Only consciousness experiencing change. This shift is not about detachment or denial. It's about intimacy. When the self drops away, what remains is connection. Not just to others, but to experience itself. There's no need to protect or perform or prove. There's just this, happening now. And what's revealed in that now is simple but profound. Awareness is already whole. It's not waiting to be completed. It doesn't need to be filled or fixed. It's not made more by pleasure, nor diminished by pain. It is the one constant, the silent witness to everything that comes and goes. You begin to notice that even your strongest emotions don't need to be clung to or pushed away. They can just be known. Sadness doesn't need to be solved. Anxiety doesn't need to be feared. Even joy doesn't need to be extended. Everything can be allowed to appear and vanish within this open space of awareness. This recognition changes the way you relate to others too. When the sense of self softens, so does the need to defend it. You no longer feel separate in the same way. Compassion arises more easily. Patience deepens. You begin to see that others are caught in the same illusion, the same trance of self, and you meet them not with judgment, but with understanding. This is not perfection. The illusion can still reassert itself. You can still be pulled back into thought, into identification. But once the spell is broken, even briefly, you know the way back. You know what to look for. And each time you remember, it gets a little easier. The self returns as a shadow, but you no longer mistake it for something real. The beauty of this path is that it doesn't require you to become someone else. In fact, it invites you to stop pretending to be someone at all, to drop the mask, to let go of the performance, and to rest in what's always been here. Not a person, not a role, but awareness itself. An awareness has no story, no agenda, no resistance. It simply knows. It allows. It welcomes every experience, not because all experiences are pleasant, but because none of them last, because awareness itself is untouched. So the invitation is simple, though not always easy. Stop, look, notice. Don't believe every thought. Don't chase every feeling. Return to the space between. Return to the stillness underneath, and see for yourself that what you've been calling you was never more than a ripple on the surface of something vast and quiet and free. Chapter 10. Nothing to find, nowhere to go. The idea that there is something more, something else, something better. That's what keeps most of us moving. We chase spiritual experiences, inner peace, transcendence. We imagine there's a destination, a finer understanding that will finally quiet the mind. And so we seek, we read, we sit, we strive. All with the subtle belief that awakening is somewhere just ahead. But awakening is not a destination. It's not a thing you reach after enough effort or hours of practice. It's a shift in perspective. From seeking to seeing, from becoming to being. And that shift is always available now, not later, not after this sentence or this breath. Now, there's a point where the mind begins to understand this, not just intellectually, but experientially. You realize that there's no state to maintain, no enlightenment to protect, no insight to hold. You're not trying to become anything. You're simply allowing everything. Awareness isn't something you achieve. It's something you notice and then remember. And what you remember is astonishingly simple. There's just this moment, this experience, not as it should be, but as it is. Thoughts come, sensations pass, emotions rise. None of it needs your intervention. None of it needs to be clung to. You begin to rest, not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer resisting what is. This resting isn't passivity. It's presence, a willingness to be with things fully, to feel without flinching, to listen without waiting for your turn to speak, to move through the world without dragging your imagined self through every experience. That's freedom, not dramatic, not ecstatic, just the absence of confusion. The irony of spiritual practice is that it begins with striving and ends with surrender. You work so hard to meditate correctly, to stabilize attention, to quiet the mind. But eventually you see that none of that effort produces what you're really after. The peace you're seeking is what remains when the seeking ends. And you don't have to stop striving all at once. You just have to notice what striving feels like, what resistance feels like, what grasping feels like. These are not moral failings. They're just patterns, movements of mind, appearances in awareness. And like everything else, they too pass when seen clearly. You start to notice the subtle ways you reattach to the illusion of self, wanting to be the one who gets it, wanting to maintain a special state, wanting to be recognized. But each of these impulses is just another thought, another ripple. You don't have to follow them. You can let them rise and fall like any other wave on the surface of the mind. And beneath the surface, there's always stillness. Not the stillness of silence, but the stillness of being, the space that allows everything else. You don't have to create it. You don't have to hold on to it. It's what remains when you stop trying to make experience different. This is why even distraction and noise can be part of the path. You get lost in thought, and then you notice. And in that moment, you're back. You don't need to punish yourself or start over. You just return, again and again. And eventually, the returning becomes more natural than the losing. The beauty of this is that it doesn't depend on circumstances. You don't need perfect silence. You don't need hours alone. You don't need to wait until you're less busy or less broken. You can wake up in the middle of noise, in the middle of traffic, in the middle of an argument. The moment you remember to look, the path is right here. This doesn't mean there's nothing to do. Practice still matters. Attention still drifts. Conditioning still operates. But you stop practicing to become something. You practice to remember what's already true. You meditate not to gain a new self, but to lose the false one. And you lose it not by force, but by seeing it was never there. That seeing can be gentle. It doesn't require a breakthrough. It can be quiet, ordinary. Just a simple noticing that awareness has no center, that experience is just happening, that no one owns it, that it doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. From that place, life becomes lighter. Not easier, always. Pain still happens, loss still cuts, fear still arises. But none of it is personal in the way it once was. There's sadness, but no sad person. There's anger, but no one angry. There's joy, and even that doesn't need to be clung to. Everything is just passing through. And in the midst of all that passing, you can rest. Not because you've found the ultimate answer, not because you've transcended humanity, but because you're no longer searching for yourself in every moment. You're no longer mistaking thought for truth. You're no longer waiting for life to begin. It has already begun. It's happening now. And there is nothing more you need than this. Thank you for listening.